Mark, thank you very much for that. I think that's a terrific clarion call for where we go next as a sector on the issue around skills. And one of those critical elements about the success of the UK as an international financial centre is the access to skills, both domestic and international, and how we remain a successful international financial centre. And the role of skills in maintaining that global prosperity is the focus of our next panel, which is chaired by Caroline Haines, the Vice Chair of Policy and Resources at the City of London Corporation. She has a terrific panel to explore this. Can you please welcome them to the stage?
So good morning, everyone. Fantastic to be with you here today. And as you heard, I'm Vice Chair of Policy at the City of London Corporation. And this question of the UK's continued status as a global centre for professional and financial services is absolutely key to us at the City of London Corporation. Skilled-based organisations whose employment policies emphasise candidate skills rather than their experience performing certain tasks have proved decisive in global economic growth and the competitiveness of leading economies. And for those of you that like facts and figures, research from Deloitte shows that skills-based organisations are 107% more likely to place talent effectively, 52% more likely to innovate, and 57% more likely to anticipate and effectively respond to change. So with a highly skilled workforce and the ability to attract international talent, the UK is well positioned to maintain and expand its leadership in finance, tech, innovation, and professional services. But we cannot afford to be complacent. That message has come through really strongly this morning. There is an acute need for continuous investment in upskilling and reskilling our workforce to address existing skills gaps. It's also vital that these efforts align with global talent strategy devised to protect our advantages. And the World Economic Forum, amongst others, has identified skills shortages and the inability to attract talent as the main barriers to transformation and competitiveness in all sectors. The Financial Services Skills Commission has done excellent work in this area, developing and launching the skill-based organisation framework, which we heard from Mark earlier, as the first comprehensive guide tailored for FPS firms to transition to a skills-based approach. And skills rank as a priority for us at the City of London Corporation, whereas an outcome from our 2025 Global City Report, we've been championing a range of initiatives designed to preempt and address emerging gaps, from working with businesses to fill digital talent gaps from non-traditional pathways through our Women Pivoting to Digital Task Force, to developing a construction workforce with green skills through our Skills for a Sustainable Skyline Task Force, to extensive work on ensuring the FPS sector has the AI skills it needs. So strategic policy reforms, as well as expanded collaboration between government, industry, and educational institutions will all be vital in this effort. With the Global City Report also pointing to the tendency of UK companies to see training as individual rather than embedded in the culture of business itself. And I can think of no better panel to contemplate this and related questions than the people that we're lucky to have with us today. I've asked them to introduce themselves as they answer the first question. And afterwards, as with the previous panel session, we'll have questions from the floor and then from the app. So I'm going to go to Chloe first and then to Tom with the same question. So Chloe, how would you describe your organisation's journey to being a skills-based organisation?
Thank Thanks very much, Caroline, and lovely to be here today. I'd say earlier on the journey, in all honesty, so I'm relatively new to my current law firm, but have been in law firms for at least the last 10 years. I'd say in my sector as a whole, I think the recruitment side of skills-based hiring and strengths-based hiring is something we've done for a while and isn't new. But I think listening to Ben and David and others around where some organisations are on their skill-based journey around skill taxonomy and really mapping out and measuring skills is where we're starting to try and move to now. So in terms of where we are at Pinsent Masons, we do have skills-based hiring, particularly in the early talent stage, which I think is a really important stage, which has already been mentioned, moving away from, in a profession like professional services, legal and financial services that have sort of historically been quite focused on academia and, technical skills and experience. I think there's a huge value in now starting to look at skills and strengths, but equally engagement in the skill, because you may have a skill but you might not like doing the skill or a certain type of work. So I think looking at both is important. And I also think, which I think it was Anne that made the point earlier around proficiency, is really important too, because again, there's a huge range. I think there's language proficiency, I think people individually always mark as more accurate, but when you look at skills, I think there's particularly around professional skills, I think if you ask individuals where they'd rank themselves versus a manager or leadership, it may look quite different. So I think the whole concept of how we measure and accurately define skills and the engagement of skills, I think is really important and something we're starting to look at. So yeah, where we are is very much looking at recruitments, but starting now to move to how we map skills, how we judge what we need right now for our law firm, but also in future where we think some of the skills developments and skills gaps may be, and then how do we articulate that really clearly in the business, and I suppose then also how do we recruit for that in future and measure, monitor, track this as well. So yeah, that's where we are at the moment.
Thank you, Chloe. Excellent. And Tom, the same question to you at a slightly different stage of the journey.
Thank you. Yes, so my name's Tom. I lead Organisational Development at Hargreaves Lansdown. I think probably a bit of context first for those of you who have not been keeping up with the press. HL used to be FTSE 100 and is now gone to being privately owned. So we're at a very important point in our journey in moving from maybe long-term shareholder value into more immediate investor returns. So it's driving a much sharper pace of change and a focus on more commercial skills in a way that's never been done before. In addition to that is the longer cultural transition of being, rather than being just an organisation within the financial services sector, we're more of a tech organisation within financial services. So the demands on us are many and varied. So what we've started to do is really from a very foundational level is describe what good looks like in the business. And it's been a hard journey and some successes along the way, but that's from both a skills base and a behavioural base as well. I call this almost like the coat hook that everything else hangs off, is when you've got a very good articulation of what good looks like for colleagues. So you could point to any individual in the business and say, tell me what good looks like in your role, and they're able to tell you. Well, that's really the foundation. So you're able to hold them accountable to that in terms of their performance. You're able to develop them against it in terms of skills gaps. You're able to assess your risk in terms of succession planning and talent pooling, and a whole myriad of other different ways. So that's kind of really where we've started, is making sure we've got the right job architecture, the right descriptions of what good looks like. And for colleagues, that means something as simple as their role profiles and how we articulate good. And then the outcome of that, we've started to move towards a more data-led approach, with the ultimate intention that we're driving good client outcomes, that we're making sure we're doing what we want to do as a business, getting good client outcomes in there. Marcus is from SCA point of view. So that's really where we're at, and we're by no means complete on the journey, but we've made some good steps along the way.
Thank you. And you pointed to Marcus. So Marcus, could you explain why the FCA sees a focus on skills and closing the skills gap as such a key to success in the FPS sector?
Thank you. And I'm Marcus Adams. I am head of People Strategy, Policy and Delivery from an HR perspective at the Financial Conduct Authority. If I think and put into a strategic context for us as an organisation, Parliament has given us a secondary objective, which is very much around UK competitiveness and growth. So it's absolutely central to the purpose of our organisation to support that. But we need to recognise the complexity of that. We are talking about an international market. We're talking about international talent. We're talking about interwoven sectors to a level that's never been experienced before. Tech merging and blending with financial services, ethical considerations, social considerations, ESG. All of these different multi-skills are needing to meld together and bring and come together. Now that means you need to recognise and value the diversity of thought that's coming together. That takes certain leadership skills. It requires closer collaboration. I was listening intently to Mark, and I promise I thought about this before hearing Mark's speech earlier. But there has to be collaboration and partnership at a level never seen before between government, regulators, industry, including all its partners, and actually society as well in terms of risk appetite in society. Now, these are leadership level skills that are fundamentally important to the success of the UK financial and professional services sectors. And that's before we've even started talking about the sort of flavour of the moment in terms of AI or anything else. So if I think about our own journey as an organisation, as the FCA, and we've just launched our 5-year strategy, we very much took it on a basis of a think forward and look back. Because once you get to the future, once you are 3-5 years ahead, it's going to be far too late to act. And that's why we see this as a strategic imperative.
Thank you, Marcus. Excellent. And Chloe, you said that you explained that you were fairly early on in terms of moving towards a skills-based organisation. What key building blocks did you put in place to enable that move, to enable that start of a change of culture within the organisation?
Yeah, so we're going through this now, and it's fascinating because a lot of it's around, cultural change, starting to think about how you create the environment to allow this to happen, which is interesting and can be quite complex. And I think one thing that I've been trying to really embed within my sort of recent organisations, particularly at the junior end, is looking at humility and learning as being a really important thing that we maybe start to recruit and talk about now. I think there's, if we look back, I think there's maybe a trend from over the years, people wanting to appear really confident, competent, and maybe not actually always feeling able to talk about skills gaps and where they might need to upskill. Where now we're asking people to sort of flip it, and that's a behavioural change and something that's quite vulnerable. So if we're asking people to continuously develop, continuously upskill themselves, I think actually embedding these type of mindset and how we, I suppose, assess that even for people who want to do that, I think is quite important. So I've been looking at this from a recruitment but also a developmental perspective around humility and the idea that, both from a manager perspective and leadership perspective, but also juniors coming in to actually embed that it's okay to, be able to say if you don't know something, and that sort of psychological safety to allow, all the organisation to try and encourage that continuous development. So I think that's one area which is more of like a cultural change to be mindful of when we're trying to do this and ask people to go out and develop themselves. They have to want to do it. Firstly, we can push all this stuff on people, but do they want to do it? So I think that's one area. And then I think the second, which we're looking at the moment in Pinsent Masons, and I'm sure many other organisations are, but is this idea of, is everyone aligned around what high performance but skills and the priority of skills looks like. So, for example, at the very leadership level, does the CEO, what they're saying is important, is that the same at team level versus an individual level? And if the answer is no, that becomes quite difficult. So I think being aligned on what the skills are that are needed and what high performance looks like in a business is really important to define clearly, rather than actually then just having some of the high categories. So I think it was mentioned earlier, empathy, relationship, management, like what does that look like globally versus locally? These things can mean very different things based on where you are internationally in a business or even regionally at times. So I think being clear, articulating really clearly what skills are required is important commercially for the business, and then actually trying to more widely in the business, look at that from a departmental perspective, so everyone has a common language around skills, and also importantly, like the how you achieve, that skill. So from a relationship perspective, you often hear people skills. We all have people skills, but what are we asking for as a business there? So I think being clearer, I think now is probably the move I'm trying to look at in our organisation, and I'm sure others are looking to do the same. So that clarity and alignment from sort of leadership to everybody and how everyone can support that, I think is really important.
Thank you. And coming to Anne as a managing partner in a global financial services practice, and from your work across a whole spectrum of companies, how are organisations thinking creatively about skills as a tool to attract the widest possible talent available? And what are the benefits of using a skills-based approach to attract this talent as opposed to other forms?
Thanks, Caroline, and great to be with you all. We typically are supporting appointments to management committees, executive committees, and boards. And I have to say, I think they are less mature when it comes to skills-based recruitment. But I'm pleased to say that there's a definite switch. When we talk to a nominations committee, almost always it starts with a discussion about skills. But it can peter off as you go through the process and as they see people who've done that job before and they get really comfortable with them. So a big part of our role is actually bringing that committee back to the original discussion and making sure that they remember where we started, and that we're sort of thinking about it in the right way, because I definitely see when businesses are recruiting at that level on a skills basis, they tend to recruit a more diverse group of people. That group of people have way more interesting discussions and the business gets better outcomes. And then that does cascade. And I've seen that sort of time and time again. I also think it's about the team around the individual. So if you are recruiting somebody to an exco or a board, yes, what they bring needs to be additive, and there might be some specific requirements that they need to fulfill. But it's also about, how does that collective leadership work? How does that group function as a whole, and not just about the individual? And let's say you are a bank and you have 3 bankers on your board, it becomes a lot easier to be creative about some of the people that you then think about to bring in. And I think in the UK, we can sometimes, say this with Marcus to my right, create barriers that aren't there. So it's very common for me to have a client say, I don't think the regulator would allow it. I'm not sure this person would get approved. My experience is that actually, if you do go back to that sense of team, if you explain what the person brings, how they sit within the whole, and actually you've got a really clear development plan for that person and how you're going to go about it, and then critically they know about the business before they go into their interview, then actually that tends to lead to an approval. I think also we're using leadership assessment and board assessment more than we have before, and I think that provides really helpful data. So I think it's pretty much the norm if you're recruiting an executive that you would use leadership assessment. But certainly committee chairs and board chairs, we tend to use quite a tailored assessment around obviously their chairing skills, but also thinking about how they will show up really in the boardroom. What behaviours will they display? is that style going to work with the rest of the people and actually with your culture? And so using that more with regards to recruitment as opposed to just in the sort of development sense, which has been more usual for boards. I think in the UK as well, we've managed to retain quite a lot of flexibility in the post-COVID environment, and I hope we don't lose that. That's not the same everywhere, so generalising massively, but US, Asia tend to be much more sort of presenteeist, particularly for the exco, whereas I think there are lots of businesses in the UK that still actually like people to have that sort of hybrid focus and way of working. I think also the sort of ability for people to work from anywhere was something that came in COVID, and some firms have sort of decided it's in the too difficult box from a tax perspective. But actually the ones who retained it, and we've done a bit of analysis on this, they are recruiting and retaining better, really. The sort of statistics show that. So I think people value that flexibility. So yes, I think firms that are doing some of those things are getting better outcomes.
Thank you, Alex. And if we can pick up the point that Anne alluded to, Marcus, about how with the FCA, skills work is going to fit into your new strategy, because there will some people be feeling a little bit nervous about developing into a skills-based organisation if it doesn't sit well with the regulatory side of the business.
Yeah, if I talk about in terms of our own experience and how that perhaps then plays more broadly, but our own experience as an organisation, and again, I'm going to pick up on what Mark said earlier, is fundamentally in developing our strategy as an organisation and thinking about the needs of that strategy, which I touched on. It's an iterative process. What capabilities do you have as an organisation? What capabilities can you build reasonably over the next 3 to 5 years? And therefore, what strategy is achievable? So very much about HR leaders, the strategy and the skills agenda being in that formation phase of that is so critically important, not as an afterthought of the strategy. So it's an organisational challenge, not an HR one, I think is really important. As a regulator, we have a sort of a fairly unique situation where actually we need SMEs who can look out and in. So we need AI, we need advanced tech to actually help regulate the industry, be ahead of the industry, but we also need to look inward. So those SMEs have got to do both in that sense. And that's critical then that we attract the right diverse talent to do that. And I think we've worked hard for many years now to do that. And building on your comments there in terms of, if I look back at the leadership of the FCA many years ago, it was career regulators. Well, now we've got former leaders in tech from eBay. We have former members of the leadership of the National Crime Agency. We have a whole diverse range of people, including career regulators. But we are melding those different experiences and knowledge together as part of an executive team. That's then leading through to our strategic workforce planning, thinking on different time horizons. And then finally, this point, which I think has been coming up a number of times here, about behaviours and mindsets. And what we're doing and what we are encouraging others to do is we are elevating, for example, 2 aspects of our values. One is around the collaboration, so the melding of those different expertise and insights and diversity. And secondly, being curious. So as an individual, being curious about your needs development, skills development, about what's going on out there. And that curiosity and that collaboration we see as really fundamental underpinning behaviours. And I think that has speaks to a broader agenda.
Fascinating. And Tom, again, developing that, we all know that we need to attract top talent to move towards global success and to retain London's position in the global market. So how have Hargreaves Lansdown thought about the whole question of reskilling and upskilling and using it to enable mobility integrally within the company so that people don't always have to be looking outwards?
Great, thank you. Well, zooming right out, going back to some of the comments and the numbers from earlier, we can't afford not to. To generate, 110 billion of tax revenues for the UK and being a massive driver of the UK's prosperity, we all have a fundamental responsibility to do it. The journey that we've been on, maybe I can give some specific examples, is, well, number one, our colleagues are really crying out for it. That's what the data is telling us. You know, our engagement survey and the questions in response to careers and talent and growth and skills really very clearly say that our colleagues are desperate for progression and growth. And a lot of it's financial. They want to, you know, get more money and get paid and move through the business. But a lot of it is about skills. And the shift that we've been on is really helping, well, the business and colleagues to understand that it's crucial. That's been a really tough journey. So an example of that would be just helping colleagues to understand what they want in their career through having better conversations with their line managers, understanding they've got to have a development plan in place, know that they're at the driving seat of their own career and one is not going to be handed to them. There is a bit of a cultural legacy, I think, not just in our business, but many businesses, that people think that if they stay around long enough, they're just going to get promoted. Unfortunately, it's not the case. So we have gone through a bit of a cultural journey on making that higher up the agenda. And an example of some of the ways we're doing that is, I call it know, grow and flow. I sense there's going to be some copywriting needed on this one as well, but this is how we especially identify, develop and mobilize talent through the business. And what I mean by that is knowing is just helping colleagues to understand what skills gaps they've got. It could be relating to our succession planning and our key people dependencies. It could be around our talent pools or our high potential leaders. That's the know part. Even just helping our leaders identify where their gaps are, do some talent assessment type work. The grow is in skills development, our learning and development offering, our early careers and apprenticeships and all those great things. And mobility is really just so we can move talent around the business in a more agile way. We know with the pace of change that we're going through right now, we need to rapidly reskill and relocate skills and obviously the people that are attached to them in a way more agile way than we've ever done before. So there's some of the things that we're doing. And one of the key access to this actually is something we did last week, is we had a careers fair. And this might seem a really small thing, but it's something that we've never really done before. And the purpose of it was to close the visibility gap. So we know that a lot of our colleagues, they have aspirations. They maybe even know, you know, that they want their boss's job in the next few months or couple of years or whatever it is, but they don't necessarily know where they want to go more longer term. And in our business, we have, you know, especially people who come in and work on our help desk and our operations teams. They're really the jumping off point for people going elsewhere in the business, so they can go off to risk or the people team or internal audit, or they go off to various other wonderful places. But they didn't really know what that took. They didn't know what it meant. What skills do I need? What qualifications do I need? Who do I need to speak to? So we've been trying to close that visibility gap for some time. And the testament to that was last week's careers fair. And we did have cupcakes, and we were expecting people to just come for the cupcakes and then disappear back to their desks. But it was really heartwarming to see colleagues introducing themselves to people that you've never met in the business, that they were kind of like, what do you do? Oh, okay, platform investments, what does that mean? And actually kind of saying, well, I've got these skills, and you need these skills in your area of the business. Which ones are transferable? Oh, okay, those ones are transferable. That represents a destination for me. And it really started to unlock a lot more of, you know, the feeling that colleagues were at the center of driving their own careers and development and growth. So that's kind of one of the bigger things that we're seeing. Yeah, it's again, we're not finished on that journey, but we're starting to see some good successes early on.
That's excellent, thank you. Can we pick up your idea of zooming out, which I love, and go to Anne? A lot of companies are exercised at the moment about the balance of looking for skills abroad and importing skills, and putting in the structure within their own companies to develop their own talent. In your global experience, what kinds of things are other commercial centres doing to try to get a balance here?
So I'd say at the moment in the UK, I think we're in a pretty good place. I think we are an inclusive country that welcomes difference. And with the geopolitical situation we have currently, there's a lot of nationalism, but we work in a global industry. So I think that works to our favour. However, that's important, but not to get complacent over, because if you look at, for example, salary differentials between the US and the UK, it can be 5 times. There's a big difference. If you look at some of our immigration, tax regimes, whether it's income tax, inheritance tax, particularly at some of the senior levels, those things matter a lot and will have an implication. I think, I look to somewhere like India and the way that they are both using technology and developing skills, and it's quite something. And, I think about the type of mandates we have in India and how they've shifted over time. So historically, there were lots of, in financial services, a lot of outsourcing or shared service centres, but now there's a really broad range of senior appointments. And you have an extremely experienced, skilled talent pool, frankly, at a much lower cost available to businesses. So it's not just financial services, lots of technology companies, huge number of US businesses with a massive presence in India. So I actually think that India is more of a risk to senior roles in the UK than AI, for example.
Very interesting.
Yeah. And then you look at somewhere like Israel, and they've decided to go more for sort of deep knowledge into cyber, AI, machine learning, which is kind of a different approach. So I think we need to think about what's our USP, what's our differentiator, what do we want to be known for, and how do we then, a bit like with the Olympics and sports teams, we did a great job of cycling a few years ago. How do we identify what that's going to be needed and sort of push for that?
Thank you, Anne. And before we go to questions, I've asked each of the panel to give one sort of pithy summary in terms of their advice in changing the culture of the workplace to an SBO. So Chloe, starting with that first, just one key piece of advice.
I think having a really clear articulation of what skills are needed for now and the future would be the one for me, and how do you sort of be really specific and then measure that within the business so you can do all the wonderful things like redeploy talent and recruit the right talent.
Thank you. Marcus?
I think my one piece would be crystal and absolutely clear. So at the FCA, we only have one strategy. It's the FCA strategy. Everything else supports that. And I wouldn't use the term culture. I would challenge the business. What do you mean? Because culture can mean so many different things. So be really clear. Are you talking about behaviour and mindset? Are you talking about leadership? Are you talking about the building? Are you talking about symbols? What is it? So be really clear.
Excellent. Anne?
I would say don't be bottom up about skills. I think it's really important to think about the whole organisation, and if anything, to go top down. But ideally, do them both at the same time. So make sure that there is a really, really strong focus on skills from the board and from the chief exec and the executive team.
Thank you. And Tom?
I would say data. I think the tendency for people teams, learning teams, talent teams is to talk about what's happening in their own functional department. The challenge we have is connecting it to more performance data, business outcomes. So whether it's decreasing your cost of operations, whether it's better client advocacy, whether it's better customer service, whether it's better efficiencies, that's what we've got to connect it to.
Thank you very much to the panel. And do we have any questions from the floor before we go to questions through the app? We can't really see with the lights, but I think there's one at the back there. Thank you.
Thank you. My name's Frank Bowley. I'm from Skills England, which Mark mentioned earlier on. Thank you for inviting me. Victoria, you took my question, which was about how we can embed skills-based organisations. Because as Skills England, our experience is British businesses, this isn't just finance, are very bad at talking about skills and skills planning, which makes, I think, our job of thinking about what skills are needed, what should be taught, difficult, because a lot of our information intelligence needs to come from you. I mean, we'll talk about AI later on. We really need you to tell us what AI skills we need to do so we can teach it. So I'm going to slightly rechange my question because I think you've slightly answered what businesses need to do, and I think there's some great stories there which we should do. How can government help businesses be better at skills planning and talking about skills? The one thing I do pick up, Chloe, we talked about common language of skills and being precise. I think the FSSC's skills framework is a great example of how that can be done. Skills England should be this autumn publishing its own skills taxonomy, which is going to be economy-wide, which will complement FSSC, so on. And I think that's one thing the government will be doing. And you mentioned data as well, how we can improve data. But is there anything else as government or as a DFE feeding into government, we can help businesses plan skills better, invest in skills, because Britain is not very good as businesses to invest in skills better, so we can then, as Skills England jobs, our jobs made easier when we can actually make sure the public skills system is delivering the skills needed.
Marcus, do you want to take that first?
I can take that. That's a very broad question with really important behind it. And I think, yes, there's going to be a place for taxonomies. Yes, there's going to be a place for a common language. I think that's really important. But I think what I spoke about earlier was that collaboration, bringing government, bringing industry, bringing support sectors, bringing regulators, bringing all of this together into a single conversation is going to be important. And I think in the past that perhaps hasn't happened as often as it should, and they've been more bilateral in nature. So at the FCA, one of the things that we see as really important in our ability to do things is our convening power, our ability to bring different stakeholders from diverse different backgrounds or sectors together. And I think there's a lot to be said for that closeness of people building relationships and understanding to then move forward. I would be my perspective on it.
Thank you, Marcus. And I think we've got time for one more question. There's an interesting one here from Nikki for you, Tom. You talked about behaviours instead of soft skills. And what Nikki is asking is, what behaviour gaps or concerns did you notice that needed to be readdressed or improved?
So it's more linked to our very specific set of circumstances at HR right now, where we are. So we have relatively new values, which have been relaunched. So our behaviours tag off the back of our values to drive those outcomes. But what we're seeing from our colleague population, our leadership population, is, well, two things really that drive the basis of the business is better connection to clients. And already HL's very, very good at that. It's something that comes out way, way above what most other organisations, I think. And that's client first, which is one of our core values. So it's a lot of the behaviours that link to that are already very strong. But becoming slightly more commercial is something that we're developing the skills in right now. And that could be something as simple as creating a business case for strategic investment. It could be how to run a P&L, that kind of thing. Never with the compromise of client outcomes, but having that bit of balance. And a lot of that is just making sure that we've got the right learning and development infrastructure for people to not just learn from our central learning and development team, but from each other. And through a lot more assignments and secondments where we can relocate people through the business and get them working on projects to develop those skills and those behaviours very, very early on.
Excellent, thank you very much. And we're out of time, but hopefully there's a number of different points there that people can pick up to help you on your journey towards a skills-based organisation, which we are all in the business of trying to promote growth and to grow our companies, but I think the client first phrase, also getting alongside our clients and growing and developing our client relationships as well, are really important. So thank you to our panel, please, and thank you to you for joining us. Again, everybody.